So our program, we have a single approach. Somebody was asking me how we work. We work around an approach that we call the African Heartlands program. And we have selected 8 heartlands around the continent of Africa. And these are in Eastern, Central, and Southern Africa. And we hope to have 2 more in West Africa. The characteristic of these heartlands has been described by Patrick. We look for large conservation destinations or conservation areas where we believe there is prospects for conserving and where we can really create economic centers and create win-wins for both wildlife and people. So my presentation will provide you the examples of how we are working directly as an organization to ensure that we can improve livelihoods, economic growth, but without neglecting conservation, which is really at the core of the AWF mission. And I will talk around 3 areas, which are a subset of the strategic themes that we use to deliver impact in the field: protected area support, land conservation, and conservation enterprise. Our protected area program has really several key objectives. But the main one is to ensure that protected areas can serve as ecological anchors for our heartlands. Why do we want to anchor these? We believe that it is really, really important to have places that have been secured for the long term by countries and by governments for conservation of wildlife. And protected areas in all these countries have been created with long-term intention to secure them for conservation. And from there, we are then able to make sure to move around to the neighboring areas in order to help secure wildlife. And what do we do with protected area authorities, protected area management in these countries? Many times, we find that they have weak capacity for management, weak capacity for planning, weak capacity for implementing programs that will be designed to ensure the viability of the species in those protected areas. So we work with them to make sure that we can plan, we can improve management, but more importantly, where the resources lack, we work with partners to ensure that we can raise the resources to deliver the kind of infrastructure that is needed, and that includes often infrastructure such as roads, improved living conditions for their staff, et cetera, et cetera. And we'll just give you one case of some work we've completed in Tanzania in the last 2 years. Tanzania is known for its strong wildlife protection programs, for its very strong conservation ethic as a country. And one of the areas that the African Wildlife Foundation has a program is a heartland that we call the Maasai Steppe Heartland in northern Tanzania. And this area has 2 protected areas that are very, very important for wildlife conservation. And when AWF started to work there, we found that it did not have the right infrastructure. It was not able to deliver the kind of tourism. It is in a highly visited area, but was not delivering the right kind of tourism support, the right kind of tourism care, and neither was it managing its conservation estate in the manner that it would have. So we embarked on a program of planning, of raising money from the US government to ensure that we could deliver on some of the areas we thought they were really weak. So this basically illustrates some of what we were able to deliver. After going through the planning process, we found that the visitor facilities were poor, and we've constructed those with support of USAID and other partners in the country. So that shows you the basically what we've ended up with after a 5-year program. We often find that despite the willingness of these governments to protect wildlife, to make sure that there is mobility among their staff, that they will often have very limited number of vehicles. And so one of the things we did was to change, completely overhaul their fleet of vehicles and other. We were able to go into the park and grade their roads to ensure that visitors could move from around the protected area, to ensure that the protected area managers themselves, responding to enforcement crises, enforcement needs, were able to move from with protected areas. There are living facilities, so we constructed a lot of houses, we trained a lot of rangers. We had to produce guidebooks on the visitor information for this protected area. And in a sense, what has then happened is that we've been able to show that there's been a growth in tourism visitation in those protected areas. There are 2 of them. The example I gave you was the Tarangire National Park, but the area has 2 protected areas that actually anchor what we call the Maasai Steppe Heartland. And we've been able to show that the 2 have benefited tremendously from our work. And the visitor numbers have since grown, and the visitor satisfaction that is expressed in this area is very high. Why should we care about whether a protected area is doing well? If a protected area is doing well, if it's being visited by tourism, we have found that it is very easy for us to move from protected areas as centers of tourism and move tourism to the periphery where the communities actually live. So if Tarangire National Park is thriving, it is very easy for us to be able to secure private sector interest to deliver tourism benefits around the protected area so that all tourism is not focused in these areas. It also means that wildlife does well, and wildlife that requires vast space in these areas is then able to move out of the park as they do well and creates a new product for communities on their own land. And so I'll go immediately to the neighborhood of this protected area. If you look at that map, I don't know if this thing has a pointer. We have this is the national park I've just been showing you where we did a lot of restoration work. This is another national park that's called the Manyara National Park. And in between is an area that serves as a corridor, the Manyara Ranch. And we found that this area would not survive and would not function in the absence of that connectivity. And because the 2 parks are connected in the way that the wildlife use them, we realized that if that area was not secured, it was going to be very difficult for wildlife and the wildlife, the ecological integrity and the viability that AWF intends for this area to be realized. So what we did was the land belonged to a state parastatal that was performing very badly, and government had decided that the parastatal had a lot of areas that it needed to privatize, and this is one of the areas that was slated for privatization. So AWF helped to form a local land trust called the Tanzania Land Trust, and persuaded government that this land should be moved to the land trust in order that it be managed differently than you would ordinarily a national park. And it was very clear to us also that the local community would not support the transfer of this land to private management as a protected area. So we're able to persuade government to transfer that piece of land to a local land trust, and then AWF has engaged with that trust to ensure that that area is managed in a manner that will provide community benefits. It will we can ensure that it is secured for conservation purposes, and especially for wildlife migrations for the animals that move in between the 2 protected areas. And that finally we can model on this piece of land the many uses that communities ordinarily put their lands to in these kinds of environments. And so the objective there was just to make sure that this land is transferred to a trust. AWF went on to raise funds to begin to capitalize this ranch, to operationalize this ranch, which was in very, very poor state, and to ensure that we could also secure many of the environmental services that it provides to the neighboring communities. And so what have been the results of our joint work with the Tanzanian Land Conservation Trust? I'll just go back so that you know why the next slide.